statistics around leadership failure are pretty well known by now, with estimates of outright failure ranging up to 50% within the first 18 months of leaders taking on a new role. And this doesn't even account for those leaders who are not as successful as they were predicted to be during the hiring or promotion phase. Now, what's interesting is when you take a look at the statistics and look under the hood at these leaders who have failed, by and large, they have had successful track records, they show high intelligence, good business savvy, solid initiative, and yet we're seeing this staggeringly high failure rate. And so why is that? Well, one commonly reported reason is that leaders in these new situations are not adequately assessing or adapting to the unique demands of the new environment. In that new environment, whether it's a promotion or a merger or restructuring, what have you, whenever you have a situation where leaders cannot transfer the knowledge, skills, abilities, attributes to a situation that's different from the one in which they were learned, they're going to have a hard time getting traction. And so in a recent study of 1,000 C-level executives from around the world, it was determined that 14% of the CEOs included in the study of 1,000 C-level executives, only 14% of the CEOs believed that they had the leadership talent necessary to execute on their business strategy. So we as HR professionals and assessment professionals need to really think about how we're assessing, selecting, and retaining our high potential leaders. And this is only going to get more intense in the 21st century workplace when you consider the challenges that are facing leaders today, right? Like globalization, significant advances in technology, significant changes in the organization. We really need to settle in and figure out how we're going to identify those leaders who are going to succeed. Now, in the same group of 1,000 C-level executives, we're presented with 28 challenges and asked to decide which of these challenges will most be vying for your attention. And these challenges included things like climate change, terrorism, cybersecurity threats, and the two priorities that bubbled to the top for these individuals out of the 28 were developing next generation leaders and selecting and retaining top talent. Clearly within the wheelhouse of HR professionals, right? These are challenges that we can build solutions for and help support our C-level executives. Now, whether we're developing next generation leaders from within the organization or attracting and retaining talent from outside the organization, what we need to bring to the table is an integrated assessment strategy that helps us identify the future superstars in our organization across all organizational levels. We need to be able to segment our talent, our candidate population, so that we can identify the right people for the right roles and provide the right kind of developmental feedback for meaningful action. Now, the need to segment our talent population stems from the fact that job performance is not normally distributed into a nice bell-shaped curve like we might like to think. In fact, in a recent study done by a couple of colleagues in our field, they looked at 5 different industries, a number of different job types, a number of different performance measures, looking at 600,000 employees. And what they found is that the distribution of individual performance is such that most people fall into the lowest performance category, here as represented by this red line, the Pareto distribution. This is sometimes known as the law of the vital few, or more simply the 80-20 rule, which says that 20% of our employee population is responsible for 80% of its productivity. And so what these researchers concluded is that we as assessment and HR professionals really need to be focused on creating assessment programs that identify those elite performers who will in fact be responsible for the majority of the productivity. Now, this can be looked at another way by looking at these pyramids here. On the left-hand side, organizations who have not engaged in the segmentation of their candidate population distribute their resources across all the top layers of the organization without differentiating the superstars. With talent segmentation, organizations are able to allocate their resources more selectively to those individuals who will be responsible for the majority of the productivity and ultimately for leading the organization. So what's the holy grail here? How do we identify those future elite performers along that slide on the pyramid and deep into our organization? Talent segmentation becomes a critical strategic imperative for our organizations, for any organization, and it's absolutely something that HR professionals can take the lead in achieving. Now, let me ask you, if you were put in charge of identifying individuals who would sit in that slide along the pyramid, what characteristic would you want to know about those individuals? What predictor or assessment measure would you want to have on those individuals to predict that?
Adaptability.
Adaptability?
EQ.
EQ?
Integrity.
Integrity?
Drive.
Drive?
Grit.
Grit? I saw your LinkedIn post there, grit. What was that?
Like growth oriented.
Growth mindset, growth orientation. Great. Ability to learn, learning agility.
Results.
All right, results. Past performance, a past record of results. What's interesting here is that no one mentioned cognitive ability or general intelligence. And what you see in the research, this represents the data from 100 years of research across thousands of studies looking at 19 different predictors of success. And what these researchers found was that general mental ability or cognitive ability is the single best predictor of success across all organizational levels, across all jobs, what have you. And it's not a question of whether or not you include cognitive ability in your assessment program. It's a question of what you add to that. So they're saying cognitive ability is table stakes. You really just need to be thinking about what you supplement cognitive ability with. But when you think about leaders who have failed, and if we're seeing 50% failure rates among leaders and even higher, I've seen studies that have shown even higher than that, I'm sure everyone in this room has met or known a leader who has failed. Was it due to cognitive ability that they failed? Was it because of cognitive ability that they failed? How many people in here have known a leader that's failed, first of all? Okay. Was it due to cognitive ability? What was it?
EQ.
EQ. Some sort of personal attribute, personality characteristic, right? Our clinical psychology friends will tell us that emotional dysfunction can absolutely impact our ability to demonstrate our native intelligence. And so personal attributes, personality characteristics are absolutely essential when we're thinking about predicting success of leaders in the 21st century workplace. And so when we go to forecast leadership behavior in the 21st century workplace, the future, we need to have an organizing framework against which we're going to build our assessment specifications. And in most cases, high-functioning organizations use some form of potential to differentiate or segment their candidate population to identify high-potential leaders. And so then the question becomes, well, what is potential? What is it we're trying to measure here? And in the talent management, succession planning arena, what we're really thinking about in order to operationalize that is, can the individual successfully move to progressively higher levels in the organization? Say 2 to 3 levels higher in the organization. And if we can accept that as our definition of potential, we need to have some sort of a blueprint. What is it we're going to measure in order to be able to predict whether these individuals can move, say, 2 to 3 levels higher in the organization? And fortunately for us, we do have a blueprint that exists. A couple of consultants in our field, Rob Silzer down in New York and Alan Church, who is the Senior VP of Global Talent Acquisition at PepsiCo, did a robust review of the literature. They did a benchmarking studies of large organizations, consulting firms, everyone who was working with potential, all with the idea of coming up with some integrated model. What is leadership potential? And what are the building blocks of that potential? And what they identified was what they called the Leadership Potential Blueprint, which basically was 3 dimensions. They crystallized 3 dimensions that cut across all definitions of potential. What they termed the foundational dimensions, the growth dimensions, and the career dimensions. And by the way, this model sits on a bedrock of performance. And so what that means is you need to be a high performer before we even assess you for high potential. This gets away from, if anyone here has been involved in the 9-box exercise or other approaches for identifying potential in your organization, you understand how performance contaminates one's understanding of potential. And so if you just admit the fact that, yeah, performance and potential are correlated, we're just going to take that out of the equation and say you got to be a high performer before we assess you. Now, the foundational dimensions are comprised of 2 components that we were just talking about: cognitive ability and personality. Cognitive ability, conceptual thinking, strategic thinking. Personality, the big 5. How does the individual behave normally? How do they behave under stress? What are their key drivers? What are their key derailers? What kind of a culture would they best adapt to? And as a leader, what kind of a culture would they build? So we want to know this at the front door. The next are the growth dimensions. And by the way, those foundational dimensions are stable over time. If I assessed your personality and cognitive ability today, I would expect the results to be pretty similar 3 to 5 years out. So those are going to be stable kinds of dimensions. The growth dimensions, they will facilitate or hinder your development as a successful leader. Here we're talking about learning and motivation, openness to learning, openness to feedback, learning agility gets thrown in here, as well as motivation, initiative, conscientiousness, career ambition. Does the individual want to be a leader? And then we've got the career dimensions, which are simply the leadership competencies. I'm guessing in most of your organizations you have leadership competencies and an understanding of domain expertise. Does everybody have a leadership competency model in their organization? Yeah? So this represents a conceptual model. So when we're going to assess leadership potential, this is the model against which we want to be thinking. We want to make sure we cover these characteristics when we're assessing for leadership potential. But that's not enough. We need to now take this and apply it to our own organization. We need to adapt it to the strategic requirements of our company. And so how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to conduct a job analysis. How many in here have conducted a job analysis before? Right. Job analysis is the foundation for every single HR program. And selection and hiring, it's no different, and it's very critical. We need to understand what are the leadership demands against which we're trying to predict, right? We need to get to understanding the competencies then that link to those leadership demands. We need to understand the domain expertise, the educational requirements, the experience requirements, etc. This will help us identify what are the specific leadership competencies that we're looking to assess against in our organization. How are we going to weight the cognitive, the personality, and the growth dimensions in our particular assessment battery? Okay? Now, this gets us pretty close, but it doesn't get us all the way. Because if we really want to predict how leaders are going to do in the future in this changing work environment that we're dealing with, we need to incorporate the contextual factors that are unique to our organization. And here I'm talking about the business environment, the organization's structure, the organization's culture, and its strategic objectives. Because again, if you think about what leaders today are dealing with, is everybody familiar with the term VUCA environment? Right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. This is the situation that most leaders are operating in today. And so when we're conducting assessments in this environment, we have to make sure that we take into account those situational or contextual factors into our assessment program. And by that I'm talking about the business environment. What are the global, economic, competitive market challenges that are facing our particular company? What's the structure look like? Is this a multinational firm? Is it a startup? What's the culture like? What are the demographics of our organization, and what are the strategic objectives? To the extent that we can incorporate all of those contextual variables into our assessment program, that's going to allow us to expand our assessment tools and expand the range of attributes that we're measuring for our leaders. And if we fail to take these aspects into account, we're going to be missing a big piece of the picture, a significant chunk of predictable variance, and we're going to be standing there scratching our heads wondering why these leaders have passed our competency-based assessment and yet they're failing at a 50% rate. Why is that? It's because we didn't take into account the contextual factors that we're talking about here. So, easier said than done. How do we actually incorporate those contextual factors? When you look at benchmarking data of high-performing companies, there was a recent study done of 100 large multinational companies, most of which were ranked by Fortune magazine as top companies for leaders. The instruments that these companies use for predicting potential are 360s, interviews, and personality inventories. Now, with 360s and interviews, what are we trying to get at here? Trying to get at past behavior, results. We're trying to look at the track record, right? But in the context of the 21st century workplace, past behavior is no longer the best predictor of future behavior. You know, think about the leadership failure rate. When you look at the stats, you see that these folks had good track records, and yet they're failing at 50% or higher rates. So past behavior just isn't the best predictor of future behavior in the 21st century workplace. So how do you predict the future? How do you predict how somebody's going to behave in the future? You create the future. You create the future, you drop your candidates into that future, you present them with relevant business challenges, and see how they perform against that. So how do you envision the future? You have to work with, during the job analysis phase, you work with organizational strategists whose job it is to plot out the organization's future. You work with leadership, and sometimes we'll work with thought leaders from business schools who will give us information about the sectors that they study, and they can, well, they'll tell you that they can predict 10 years out. So we have to envision this future by leveraging these experts, and then we will present this future to candidates and see how they do in the future. That's the best way to predict future behaviors, to see how they behave in the future. So we've just made job analysis a very glamorous part of our study here. So that alone is a tremendous achievement. So now how do we take this vision of the future and translate it into something that our candidates can actually take? And how do we administer this future to our candidates? So the technology that is now available to us is so significantly advanced, and the cost has come down so much that we can create these business simulations, these multimedia business simulations that allow us to measure a vast array, almost a limitless array of leadership attributes. And if done correctly, the immersive nature of these simulations will create a sense of psychological involvement, a sense of urgency, and elicit the best possible performance from our leadership candidates. So we'll have this vision of the future. We'll use the technology to build a simulation around it. We'll create a dramatic narrative that drives the simulation. And our candidates are evaluated on the relevant business challenges that are likely to take place at 2 to 3 levels higher in the organization, in an organization representative of maybe 3 to 5 years out, right? So I'm going to give you a couple examples of this. The first multimedia sim I'm going to show you comes from UNICEF. They were interested in identifying leaders who could manage in a very stressful relief situation, disaster relief situation. This would be for first-line leaders leading a team out in the field. And so the first thing I'm going to show you is sort of the orientation that these individuals get to the job. This is first day on the job. Again, these are candidates. This is going to be first day on the job, and they'll be getting a brief orientation.
A magnitude 7.1 earthquake struck on the southern border of Tavak at 8:24 this morning. Local volunteers are cooperating with the military to find and rescue survivors. Joining the efforts now is the international humanitarian organization Children First. Their representative, Andrea Pavia, is there on the scene. Andrea, what can you tell us about what you've been seeing today?
Well, Carla, it's been a horrible tragedy. Mass casualties, structural damage, parents and children are missing. And a lot of these children are too scared to speak to anyone about who they are, who their parents are. We've been working with translators and local authorities to identify these children and get them where they need to be.
Mr. Pavia, we've seen you out there in the field before, not far from where you are now. Is that right?
Well, Children First has had ongoing missions in this region to help immunize local children from polio. As an organization, we do our best to provide disaster relief, and we're moving our resources into that area now. We do whatever we can to save children's lives, and we know they're going to need our help for a good long while.
Okay, so that's a brief orientation. They get a sense for what the organization is about. Again, these are outside candidates, so they don't exactly know everything yet. This provides a realistic job preview. Then we move into providing some realistic kinds of assets within the assessment itself. They get a chance to do some easy lookup type questions. And in this case, they get emails. There's a toolbar at the top that they're able to access. They get an email that says, look, we've just had a disaster. We were going to onboard you today, but you need to pack your bags and get out to the field because this is a critical situation. So that's pretty typical for an organization as well. We're going to drop back into the scenario and you get a chance to see what happens there.
Luckily for the major cities, most of the damage was out in the countryside. Our main problem is going to be the country roads. Well, roads. A lot of them are basically dirt roads to begin with. We need to know what state they're in, and we need to know what disaster relief supplies have gotten where. Anytime there's a quake this bad, food insecurity becomes the real problem. So welcome to Field Base Echo. This is our base camp for operations along the border. Most of what we have here is on loan from the Slovakian Government Office of Disaster Management, so be polite. Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
There are a few representatives from the Slovakian government staff. Most of the volunteers are locals, and then we've got a few of our own people here just to help keep it all together.
Gita!
Frank Mason, he's our regional health coordinator.
Listen, we gotta talk.
Hey. Liza Barnes, head of logistics.
All right, we gotta change trucking companies. The last 3 shipments have all had bad refrigeration. Any supplies we get spoils before it even gets here. And with the new earthquake, things have gone from bad to worse.
Let's get this down.
But it's really not even about the trucks. It's about the mountain roads. Almost all the roads are blocked with rubble, okay? So tell Andrea what we need is a real road crew, and we need the minister to start moving.
And security. We need police presence.
You can see how the context is built into this and drives the simulation, and the business demands, in this case, the challenges, are presented in sort of a seamless way. The next one I'm going to show you is for an electric utility company where we were able to envision the company 7 years out. And they're concerned with a number of things like cybersecurity threats. They've got nuclear facilities, and so that's obviously a big concern, but they're also changing the way they think about customers. In the future, electric utility companies are going to care about you. I know that's a little alien thought here, but they're interested in you as a customer and also new products and services that they can provide, like electric vehicle charging stations. So you have just been selected as a CEO from the outside. And a few individuals within the organization are not that pleased with that decision because they themselves thought that they might be better positioned for that role. So you're going to see a little political backstabbing that might take place in this scenario as you're trying to manage a number of different things, including whether or not to invest in certain businesses. Now, this was set up more as a trailer for an organization like a movie trailer. The organization wanted to present this to their executives to let them know what they were going to be assessed on, what the assessment was going to look like. So you'll see this more as a trailer than an actual demo like the last one. In this case, these individuals are presented with organizational charts so they know who their team is going into it. This is all presented as a virtual simulation, by the way.
Viceroy Energy, leading millions of Americans towards a brighter energy future.
Viceroy Energy continues to be an industry leader in innovation and diversification.
Breaking news in the energy sector today.
Caden Worthing will be Viceroy Energy's new chief executive, the power supplier announced today, only 4 months into the search for a successor.
Now, this is a strategic initiative, so it's not without opposition.
Customer service is getting overwhelmed by this.
The landscape is changing.
It's a good idea.
We're looking forward to finding a positive solution to this problem.
Oh my.
It was a cyber attack.
Are you back online?
Still shut down.
You people are the bane of my existence, Caden.
How and when does this go public?
Let's put our heads together. We'll put together a list of action items.
Shareholders aren't particularly thrilled.
This is not speculation.
We don't know how this affects profitability.
It's too early to tell.
We are a bedrock stock. Let's stay that way.
I understand you have an all-hands town hall scheduled. Do us all a favor. Make it productive.
I'm very excited to welcome everyone to our first CEO Town Hall with Caden Worthing. Caden?
The other aspects of this would be emails, video voicemails, so you're making it realistic, just like what you would need to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So you've got all kinds of different assets that are being presented to the candidates. Here's the electric vehicle charging station, investment opportunity that you need to go through. So you get the idea that we're looking to assess individuals in this organization of the future, and this is where this particular organization conceptualized that they were going to go. So let's circle back to the initiatives and challenges that we're trying to solve here, which is developing next generation leaders and attracting and retaining top talent. We're also trying to reduce the failure rate of leaders. Now, what you have here is an integrated assessment matrix that's tied to the key leadership competencies along the left here, and we've got the instrumentation across the top. So you've got multiple perspectives and data sources by which you're going to assess these critical leadership competencies. And these different data sources are going to provide you with multiple methods for evaluating an individual's opportunities and strengths for becoming a leader. The personality we've got linked up to these leadership competencies. Personality, again, is how are they doing normally? How do they do under stress? What kind of culture would they develop as a leader? The cognitive ability, strategic, structural thinking. Then we want to have an interview in here as well. We want to understand what are the experiences that the individual brings to the table. And not just a checklist of the experiences. We want to know what they've learned, what they can bring to 2 to 3 levels higher in the organization of the future, right? Then we've got the 360 feedback. We want to understand how others see you on those competencies critical for leadership success. And then the bang for the buck comes with the simulation, where we're actually assessing the individual's behavior at 2 to 3 levels higher in the organization of the future. We will combine the data from these different sources to triangulate on each of these competencies, come up with an assessment by competency, and then overall on the Leadership Readiness Index and a Leadership Potential Index. So now the trick is, how do we take this and apply it to our own organization? And this matrix here, I apologize, I tried to fit more words on this, but I couldn't get them on. This is an integrated assessment and development matrix that links to key leadership transitions within the organization and targets individuals at different career stages. So starting at the early career phase, if I want to segment my talent, understand who has the potential to be a leader in this organization, I'm going to start with maybe a 2.5 hour online assessment that gets at those foundational and growth characteristics within that leadership potential blueprint. As I move up in the organization, I'm going to get deeper into the assessment process because I'm now looking to confirm talent. I'm looking to incorporate that data into my succession planning process. I'm looking to determine movement decisions at the very top of the house. So I'm going to have some very in-depth kinds of simulations that I'm working with, as well as all the other aspects of the leadership potential blueprint here, right? So what we've done is we've taken that leadership potential blueprint, we've done a job analysis to adapt it to our unique organization. We've overlaid it with the contextual aspects that are specific to our organization, and then created these different assessment programs at each level. What's missing on this matrix is the development side, because there's a full leadership development component to this. So the data that comes out of the assessment program gets fed into feedback reports, and individuals then are coached or mentored, put in experiences and a number of other developmental aspects that relate back and allow them to progress up. This represents an integrated framework for developing next generation leaders across the enterprise. It ensures the organization is identifying and nurturing its talent early on in the organization, creating a robust talent pipeline, and then informing movement decisions at the top. Are there any questions about this? I know there's a lot of data on this, and we've got the handout here where you can actually read it, and it's also in the SHRM report that we produced. But are there any questions about this particular graph?
One question I have
yes.
Is biodata and personality. What's the reference to biodata?
Biodata gets at some of the same characteristics as personality, although the items tend to be a bit more job related. So with personality items, you're still measuring big 5 characteristics, obviously, but you're doing it with items that are more generic in nature. With biodata, you can create the items to look and feel like the job. And so when candidates are taking these tests, sometimes they may wonder why I'm taking a particular item. And so oftentimes we'll create these biodata instruments that still get at conscientiousness and some of the soft measures, soft skills, but do it in a more job-related way.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. There are some great personality instruments out there. The Hogan Personality Inventory we'll use a lot. That is normed in the industry, and you have executive norms and first-line manager norms, and it's a really excellent instrument. We'll use that a lot. The other advantage of some of these, the personality inventories, biodata, is that they reduce adverse impact in your assessment batteries. So when you have cognitive ability tests, you tend to find more differences between majority and protected groups, and so you want to make sure you're looking at that and taking care of that through some of these softer measures. Other questions? Now, this represents a fully fleshed out version of where an organization might go with their assessment program if they're truly looking to identify hypos, create those robust pipelines, develop next generation leaders. This represents what PepsiCo has done, and it's a robust model. I've got a video next that shows their description of this, bring these words to life.
As one of the leading food and beverage companies in the world, PepsiCo has 260,000 associates in 200 countries and territories. Therefore, our objective is to get, develop, and retain the best talent. That's the reason we created LEAD.
LEAD is a very creative acronym for Leadership Assessment and Development. It's basically individual assessments, but what's unique about it is that those assessments vary depending on the job level. It was designed to measure PepsiCo's leadership competencies and what are the leadership competencies of the future. How we get at that is something called a multi-method, multi-trade approach, which just means that we use multiple methods to measure those competencies.
It does 3 things for us. Number 1, it provides us with information about our highest potential talent in a consistent and valid manner. Number 2, it provides individuals, participants, with feedback that can help them learn and grow. And number 3, it provides the company with data that can help us have informed talent management decisions and discussions.
We go ahead at each level and give people 4 different assessments. From a foundation perspective, we measure cognitive ability and personality. To assess people on how they're doing today, we use a 360 feedback survey. To assess the dimensions of tomorrow, we use a business case simulation either online or in person.
So the development process for LEAD is really unique because each tier has a really tailored approach. So at the mid to senior levels of the organization, internal talent management, OD, and HR professionals work really closely with participants to craft an individual development plan. And then our team also hosts development orientations and trainings with participants and key HR stakeholders to guide and support them through the process. Our model prioritizes on-the-job learning, so through things like stretch assignments, but it also includes mentoring and coaching, as well as further education and training through things like our PEP University.
The results of the program have been phenomenal. We're finding superstars that we might have otherwise missed and giving people the opportunity to develop skills that they wouldn't normally have had. LEAD has proven that we can harness the power of our people and grow and develop our future talent. It's been great to see that happen.
As an HR professional, as a sponsor, and as a participant, I really think LEAD provides a platform for more intentionally build pipelines, to more surgically work on key talent, and personally help me realize my true potential.
On behalf of PepsiCo, we're honored to receive the HR Impact Award. We'd like to thank our vendor APT Metrics, who's been with us on this journey, and we'd like to thank SHRM and PSYOP for this prestigious honor.
I'd like to talk briefly about where we see the future of assessment and hiring practices going. We've talked a lot about how great technology is, how it allows us to measure this vast array of characteristics, engage our candidates, elicit their best possible performance. But there is a darker side to the technology story, and it emanates from a select group of vendors who are peddling technology-enhanced assessments without the psychometric underpinnings and the scientific data necessary to support that. And unfortunately, what we've seen are some organizations falling prey to these bright, shiny objects that offer promises of high engagement, low cost, high efficiency, and it is the commercialization, the rush to implement the latest technologies that's empowered a commercialization of assessment tools that exist at the expense of good, solid professional practice and sound science. And we as HR professionals need to position ourselves to help our organizational leadership balance this exuberance for the latest high-tech tools with an understanding of sound measurement standards and ethical practices. With all the advances that we see in technology, we're going in a number of different directions, and we just need to get our arms around it. You know, you think about the high-stakes nature of the decisions that we're making in the hiring and assessment process. The decisions that we make need to be tied to scientifically derived criteria and professionally validated assessment tools. Otherwise, we are going to find ourselves in some trouble. And it's not just potential litigation that we can face here. It's also, if we don't professionally validate our assessment tools or use scientifically derived criteria, how do we know that what we're assessing is actually going to predict success on the job, right? So it's the challenge, sure, in the back of our minds, but we also want to make sure we're selecting the right people for the right roles. That's what validation does for you, and you'll probably hear more about that tomorrow when the legal discussion comes up. Now, the proliferation and successful marketing of these bright, shiny objects is not a huge surprise because organizations, in fact, do need to assess for fit, understanding whether an individual is going to fit to the organization. And so there's nothing wrong with that. But my point is that we need to be more proactive in vetting some of these tools that are sitting out there, and as necessary, offer up some viable alternatives. Now, what you'll oftentimes see with these game-based assessments are stimuli that bear no relationship to the job. They don't appear to have any scientific relationship to the job either, and so the question becomes, you know, how do we know this is working? And the research literature is very limited as well right now in terms of whether or not these game-based type assessments actually predict success on the job. The big question clearly is, what are we trying to measure here? What would you think we're trying to measure in this scenario?
Altitude?
Bravery, risk-taking, maybe? Yeah. So the questions are, what is it we're trying to measure here, and how are we going to measure it? And until we can sort through some of those issues and build a research base that supports some of these alternatives, buyer beware. And so it really is truly up to us as HR professionals to be on the front line to help vet that and offer up viable alternatives as necessary. Now, we're able easily, with the technology that's available to us today, to be able to create these kinds of scientifically sound procedures that are highly engaging. We can create reliable, valid instruments that, as you see, have the storyboard dynamics associated with them. They're efficient and scalable across all organizational levels. One of the things we often get asked by clients is we want a measure of culture fit, and we want it to be done in 5 minutes. And the concern there is that if you have a long assessment, and particularly directed at the millennials, these individuals are going to drop out of the assessment process because of too long screen time. Have you ever experienced a millennial that has a problem with screen time? That's not the issue. The issue is whether or not they're engaged in the process. So if you can create an engaging experience for these individuals, they'll stay on as long as you want them to stay on, and you can measure as many constructs or dimensions as you want to. So my point here is that we don't have to fall prey to these bright, shiny objects just because of the promise of a highly engaging experience for our candidates. We've got the technology here now. I'm going to just show you one example of many that can be used to engage candidates. Now, in this scenario, we can provide a guided tour to our candidates. We have Christy here, who's going to take our candidates on a guided tour of the organization. And along the way, the candidates are going to be presented with a series of item types, from problem solving, could be personality items, biodata, what have you, it doesn't matter. The point is that our candidates are going to go on this journey. And they're actually going to have some control over the journey. We're going to provide them with a series of destinations that they go to. And at each destination, they'll hear about the company, they'll hear about the job that they're applying for, and then they'll be presented with some item types. So they, again, select the journey. We've built a casino. We were talking about casinos earlier. We built Fred's Gaming House, which is a worldwide casino, has locations all around the world. And our candidates hop on here and they start looking at the different destinations. Where do you want to go? Well, the first case, this person wants to go to Vegas. And Christy will say, welcome to Las Vegas, and describe the property, go through the culture and other aspects of the organization. And what's interesting is that the research literature out there does indeed show that realistic job previews are strong correlates with turnover. And this provides that very aspect, as well as organizationally specific imagery to help set the context and facilitate candidate immersion in the process. So here I've gone to Vegas. I'm going to be presented with some item types. This is a situational judgment test. In each of the last 3 months, your department has scored below standard on the quality of service provided to guests. What would you do? So again, if it's not obvious, that's mobile enabled. And there could be multiple choice items that come up, how I would handle that situation. You can also, there's a number of different ways that you can capture data. It could be open-ended, it could be videotaped, but in this case, when you're doing a broad swath of candidate selection, you probably want to stick with more multiple choice kinds of formats here. So that's a situational judgment test, getting at some problem-solving skills, excellent choices. Christy's providing some positive feedback, which you get in a lot of the gaming instrumentation that's out there. They get to select another destination. They want to go to China this time. There's some description of China. And now we're going to get into some personality type items. Which of the following most describes you in relation to your work? There's any number of ways that you can adapt these kinds of assessments to your organization based on what you do. So the technology is here, and so my point is simply that the technology that's out there, the bright shiny objects, look engaging. You really just have to evaluate the measurement underpinnings and also look at some of the ethical practices that are being engaged in with some of these folks. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have the technology, we have the item types that we can use to successfully predict whatever we want to predict within organizations.